Is that okay, everybody? Okay. I was just saying, I can't get over just seeing everybody again. I mean, it's just wonderful to have a room full of people. Delightful. Okay, so back to my favorite text, the Avatamsaka Sutra. We're in chapter 9 still. I don't want to hear any comments from the peanut gallery there. Diligently and deliberately moving through this. Wisdom is something you don't want to just swallow whole, like Pigsy swallowing the date. You want to chew on it a bit. We can over-chew, and that would be my fault. But we're on this section. I have page 52, I believe, in my text, 52, 53. We're starting the new verses, and the theme here for reference you can go to, this is the power, 自贡德者方便力. This is the power of expedience. This is the power of expedience is the refrain that keeps happening. Everybody kind of find that passage? So I'm going to do 5 verses, just go down 5, and see if I can't cover them tonight. Did we read the Chinese for the first verse last week? I thought we might have. Anybody remember? The 智慧, Wudong. Anybody remember that? Next stage, of course, is to memorize it, but first you got to remember it from week to week, and then you can memorize it. Okay, we're starting out really busy here. So let's just go through the first 2 verses slowly in the Chinese, and then I'll read all 5. So please join me. 智慧无争，法无边，超诸有海。到彼岸，寿量光明悉无比，四功德者方便力，所有佛法皆明了，常观三世无言转 ，what is it 转，虽缘境别不分别，四难四者方便力。Okay, so you can see here. The 4th line of all these verses ends the same. This basically is the power, the fangbian is the expedience. So in English, I'm not going to play too much with the translation, but with unequaled wisdom and boundless dharma, he transcends the sea of all existence and arrives at the other shore. And in his lifespan and brilliance are beyond compare, incomparable. This is the power of the expedience of the one with merit and virtue. With a clear understanding of all the Buddha Dharma, he constantly contemplates the 3 periods of time unwearyingly. Although he accords with states, he does not discriminate. This is the power of the one who is difficult to conceive of. Delighting in contemplation of living beings without the thought of beings, universally viewing all destinies without a thought of destinies, constantly dwelling in the stillness of dhyana, a mind unfettered. This is the power of expedience, of unobstructed wisdom. He penetrates all dharmas by means of good and clever means. And look at that. Diligently cultivates the path of nirvana with proper mindfulness. And by being separate from inequality, delights in liberation. This is the power of expedience, of still quiescence. And then the last verse for tonight. He has the ability to exhort others to go towards the Buddha's Bodhi, tends towards and enters all wisdom, which is like the Dharma realm, and uses goodness to transform beings so that they enter into truth. This is the power of expedience of the mind that dwells in Buddhahood. So, as I said last time, most of the focus is going to be on this concept of expedience. And I quoted or read to you a passage that some of you are familiar with. It's one of the earliest texts in the Mahayana tradition. This is the Lotus Sutra. It appears about the 1st century of the Common Era. And it's during this time that basically all of the beginning of the teachings are starting to be written down. So no matter which canon you look at, they're all coming into written form around the same time, around the 1st century of the Common Era. For those of you who are, another side would be really just about after the birth of Christ. So this is one of the earliest texts that appears. It is widely read, memorized, and studied and worshipped throughout the Buddhist world. And this is an amazing text in some ways because it's establishing a couple things. Once it's establishing very clearly that all beings have this awakened full nature, the text we're reading tonight. This is the power of the Buddha, this is the power of the Tathagata, and so forth. These powers that are being described here are said to be the birthright, so to speak, of all living beings, and this is what this sutra is establishing. All beings have this potential for Buddhahood. So it's tremendously positive and uplifting. The non-discrimination side of it is, although we all have the potential, it's not fully realized across the spectrum of living beings, or even across the spectrum of people. So just as you can see different talents or different expertise or different skills and ability are unevenly displayed or distributed across the human continuum, so too with awakening or sagehood or these enlightened qualities. But the key point is that they are universally and fundamentally the same potential in anyone. They're just realized differently. So what the Avatamsaka is doing and what the Lotus is doing is basically saying, how do you get from where you are to that fully awakened potential state that you have? And it's mapping out the path that one would take. The goal of this, of course, is not to have you necessarily believe in the Buddha or even become a Buddhist, but rather to tune into this deep spiritual potential that you have and cultivate it, to refine and polish it and make it shine. And so it's essentially a human pointing. And if you look at this text, if we take it apart psychologically, mostly it's talking about how you cultivate your mind. Mind being the root of everything else. The emphasis on the Avatamsaka stated early on is the understanding and expanding of the mind in all its states. That's what the Avatamsaka purports to study. And it's not, quote, the Buddha mind, it is our mind. Our mind can become Buddha mind or it can become upside down mind, depending on how we use it, but it's the same mind. So this is the scope of this. So what we read last week was really important because it lays out if indeed this potential is whole and complete inherently, but it is realized differently, then how does one move along towards that? And basically here, what does the sage or the Buddha or Bodhisattva do to stimulate that potential in all the various living beings? And by living beings, we're talking about the 10 realms, from the hells and the animals up to the devas and so forth. So you're talking about the 10 realms of existence. How does one work in all those different realms? Much less, how does one work among all the different capacities of people? I mean, if you talk about, well, how does one teach in the hells? You have Earth Store Bodhisattva giving descriptions about teaching in the hells. You have other descriptions that deal with spirits and ghosts and so forth. You have other descriptions of teaching Asuras or Devas, very rich in all the teaching. And of course, the human realm of the 6 paths. But within the human realm, the variations and variety are mind-boggling, just absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, I guess it's a superficial way of thinking that you want to buy a gift for somebody. Oh, okay. What do you buy? Christmas time comes around, right? You want to buy a gift. What do you buy? Well, you have to think about what would they like. Well, no, I mean, yeah, if you're really thinking about what would they like, what do they need? And then you try to match that gift. Sometimes you hit it, sometimes you don't. But it's not the same gift for every person. The same thing with illnesses. The variety of illnesses require a variety of medicines to counteract them. And so if you look at the pharmacological spread, you get a kind of corresponding Dharma pharmacy spread of what would be needed to correct the maladies, the mental, emotional maladies of living beings and their confusion. Very, very diverse and rich. From this comes the idea of Fangbian or Upaya, which is what this passage is about and why I read this text last week. And that is saying once the Buddha realizes, every Buddha that realizes his full awakening potential, basically in one way or another exclaims, how strange indeed, how absolutely marvelous and strange. All beings have this nature and all can become or realize this only because of not seeing things clearly and a grasping and attaching to things that cannot be obtained, do they cover it over and don't get it. The not seeing things clearly, which they call Diandiao, Mengshang, upside down dream thinking or wrong thinking or Wangshang, is the wrong use of the mind. It's misperception. And with that misperception then comes a grasping and attaching to things that can never be got at. And this describes the turning and flowing in samsara. Okay? So what happens here, once the Buddha realizes and he goes, oh, OMG, oh my gods, and just goes like, wow, then he says, but how can I possibly relate what I've just realized? Because this full potential of Buddhahood is beyond words, it's beyond language, it's so direct and immediate. And with it comes all these powers of perception. Sometimes we call them extraordinary or supernatural, but I don't want to go down that. Just saying the full capacity of the human mind, when it's unleashed from all these inhibitions, these coverings, is said to have the 10 powers of a Buddha. And these powers include knowledge of past lives and so on and so forth. Now he's got this full scope of wisdom available. How is he possibly going to teach living beings? So remember last week we read at this point, he pauses and says, I don't think I can do it. And hesitates and says, I think I'll stop at this point and not begin a teaching career, because the bridge between where I am and where living beings are started is so immense. It's just a vast chasm. It's not, I don't know how to. Then he remembers what? Remember last week, I'm quoting this passage, and he says, then I thought of the power of skillful means practiced by past Buddhas. He comes up with this and thinking, what all Buddhas did in the past is this skillful means, upaya, and then begins to go into this text. Now, what follows here is a very interesting part. Why am I doing the lotus? I said in the Avatamsaka. Well, I'm kind of weaving them together here with you. Comes from the same mind. What follows here is then the wonderful parable of the burning house. This is the next chapter that follows. So once he has this realization, and then once he discovers the idea of skill and means, and by the way, I'm going to make a statement that I can back up at least from the text and even from my teacher, that all Dharma, all Buddha Dharma, all will be called the canon, the teachings, the three divisions, the sutras, the Vinaya, the commentaries, all of this is expedient. All of it is Fangbian, Upaya. And I quoted you the Platform Sutra last week where the sixth patriarch says, basically, if there weren't any people, there would be no need for Dharma. There wouldn't be any Dharma. Dharma arises because of people, and it's only because people have this nature that Dharma can actually catalyze. If you have Dharma, but you don't have this potential nature, there's no connection between the two. It's useless. So it only happens because there can be this catalytic spark of lightning going between positive and negative, if you want to use the, what is that, a kind of science, what is that, atmospheric model, right? Negative and positive. You know, if you see a lightning stroke, they just did it, you see a lightning come down to make a strike, but just before light goes up from the object. So it reaches out to connect. It's not that it just goes down and strikes, but there's an interconnection between the lightning coming down and a reaching up on the other side. You can see this. It's really quite amazing. When I thought, I think, that's like reciting the Buddha's name. You know, the Buddha is mindful of people, and then you're a little bit, and then they connect. Kind of an interesting metaphor. In any event, this potential then is what is being activated, and all the teachings are expedient. So the whole idea of getting into fight over which dharma is better or not is completely crazy. It's completely upside down. And even all the sects and divisions that people will get into are basically another form of attaching. So we give up our attachments of food, fame, wealth, sex, and sleep, but then we attach to this ism, that yana, and this dharma door and whatnot. And we actually fight with each other. Which one's better? So all of this is to misunderstand the fundamental purpose is to untie whatever particular knot we have. Okay, so I got into this last week with the lotus, and then the wonderful parable that follows is a parable of the burning house, where by analogy, the Buddha in the lotus flower says, people who are confused and upside down, the passage is really quite wonderful describing. This is a Buddhist rendering of not human nature, but human nature uncultivated. Human nature is Buddha nature, but human nature uncultivated is not Buddha nature realized. It's dormant. So here he says, I see beings. This is what the Buddha sees. I see beings wandering in the six paths of existence, poor, deprived of merit and wisdom, entering into the bitter sea of birth and death, and suffering repeatedly without end. They are deeply attached to the desires of the five senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, just as yaks are attached to their tails. Obstructed by greed, they are blind and cannot see. They have eyes but cannot see. They do not seek the Buddha, and so on and so forth, nor the Dharma. They're immersed in wrong views, and they try to eliminate suffering through suffering. I feel compassion. And out of that compassion then comes remembering the expedience, and then the path of teaching. And the metaphor of the burning house, then it says, I see living beings in this way as little children playing with toys in a burning house. And they're so immersed in their toys and their games that they do not realize the house is on fire. There's no smoke alarms. This is early, right? Or even if there are the alarms, they took the batteries out to put them into their toys so they could play with them, right? So, whatever, you got to use your imagination here, right? Oh, if they only had smoke alarms in the whole Lotus Sutra, no. And the kids don't realize it. And so the elder, this kind elder, the father, tells and shouts at them to come out, and they just said, like, go away, don't bother us, we're playing, we're having fun. They tune them out. And then he says, well, maybe I could carry them out, but there's so many, and I'm not that strong that I could get them all out in time. And probably what they do is run back right in if I pulled them out. They'd be upset that I pulled them out of the back. So I have to find some way to lure them out on the basis of them wanting to come out. So he comes out and says, I have these marvelous toys outside. And they go, wow, better than the toys you're playing with here, and therefore lures them out of the house, the burning house, and then gives them the three different paths of Bodhisattva, Shravaka, and Pratyeka Buddha to cultivate. All of them expedient as well. So this is how the metaphor goes. So now we're into this passage. But what I want to do is not only stress tonight this idea of upaya and expedient, but I want to suggest that upaya is a mechanism of fusion of wisdom and compassion. Wisdom and compassion. So upaya is the expression of the fusion of wisdom and compassion. Out of the wisdom comes the seeing of everything as it is. And all of the seeing then sees that all living beings are also have this potential, but are suffering. And then the compassion arises. Which order? I'm not sure, because they're non-dual. When you look at the Buddha's life, you see very early on as a child, his curiosity to know how things really were was right in line with his compassionate regard and kindness towards the suffering of living beings, animals, creatures, people that were working and dying, and so forth. Even his experiences when he goes out in the palace are an encounter with suffering of humanity, the mortality and the sickness and the dying and so forth. So his love, or I should say his overwhelming desire to know, gnosis, wisdom search, is also matched by a corresponding compassion. These two never separate in his whole path. In fact, when he finishes, he goes back and begins a preaching career of 49 years after his profound awakening, and goes back to his mother and his son. And to his wife. So even though he leaves that, he returns. And it's the compassion and wisdom that are working together. It's a really interesting blend. So don't think of those as two different things. In fact, what seems the text is saying, from the wisdom, and this is really profound, he doesn't see self anymore. He doesn't see an isolated monad, a self-contained self, but he sees this interrelated sphere of existence, not self. That doesn't mean nothing. It means the self is an artificial barrier that is not real. It's a construction that we place on our, and really what we are is we're deeply interrelated, interconnected. This is Tongti Dabe, single substance, great compassion, it's called. With the wisdom, they see that there is no self and nothing that belongs to the self. In the Avatamsaka, it says, just like all Buddhas, they awaken to the truth of not self. And then they see there's no difference between themselves and all beings and all worlds. So if that's what they see with the wisdom, the compassion is a natural, spontaneous, almost inevitable outgrowth of the wisdom. It's not real wisdom, but there's still a self who's getting it. It's my wisdom, my precious. No, that can't be real wisdom. So you see that the wisdom and compassion are non-dual. So that's what I wanted to maybe go into a little bit. Now let's go on. So the first one, with unequaled wisdom, boundless dharma, transcends the sea of all existence. We did this before. All existences is talking about 25 realms of existence. This is a technical description, and I'm not going to go over it again tonight. I'm sure you all remember what the 25 are, and I bore you if I go into detail again. But basically, it's talking about the three realms of desire, form, and formless realm. And it's also talking here about the six paths: hells, animals, ghost, asuras, devas, and human. But I think we have to be careful here. When it says he transcends, this is a difficult word. What it means is he's not confined by, or she's not confined by those paths anymore. It doesn't mean you leave them behind, because then the compassion wouldn't be working. So it means you're not stuck in. You can move through the paths of existence. And if you read the text, you'll see the Bodhisattva goes everywhere, yet it remains unattached. Just like the lotus flower is in the water and the mud, but the flowers are above. Enters the fire and is not burned. These are metaphors that are given for being in the world, but not of the world. Being with living beings, but not confused about those relationships. You are in dharma friendship. You are in kindness and compassion that brings you together, rather than love and craving and manipulation and, that kind of thing. So transcend here means simply not bound by anymore, but it doesn't mean remove from and leave behind. The other shore is basically just a metaphor for the opposite of confusion and unawakened. So it's the shore of awakening, but it's also the shore of freedom from suffering. It's a profound liberation. Again, in the Avatamsaka, and I would say at the heart of Dharma is this concept of non-duality, bu'ar, not two. What it means is that there is a continuity between this shore and other shore, between living beings and Buddhas. To say living beings and Buddhas are non-dual doesn't mean they're exactly the same. It means they have the same potential. They're along the same continuum, different manifestations of the same substance. Just like in the text says ice and water. Water is a single substance. In one form it's ice, other form it's flowing water. It's not two different things, but one thing and two different. So that's what non-duality means, if I could clarify that. So here, the other shore and this shore are ways of speaking, but they aren't distinctly different places. Let me give you a quote from the Platform Sutra, one of my other favorite texts. This is Huineng, the great master of the six Pure, who says, ordinary deluded people, unaware of their essential nature, do not realize that the Pure Land is within themselves. So the other shore, the Pure Land, and this shore is samsara, he's saying they don't realize that it is actually within themselves. So they long to be born in the East, the eastern land of bliss. And they long to be born in the West. There's two different Pure Lands. There's one in the East, and there's one in the West. That's probably north and south and all between. That's one Pure Land. To the enlightened person, this is really a wonderful line. To the enlightened person, all places are the same. To the enlightened, to the awakened person, all places are the same. Why? Because their mind is in purity. And purity means not confused, not obstructed, not, as the Lotus Sutra says, blind and deluded and chasing after the five senses. When that stops, that's the Pure Land. And that Pure Land is here and now. So the other part of the text says the Trued, T-R-U-E-D, the Trued mind is the Bodhimanda. It's a place of awakening. It's a monastery. The Dharma of non-duality then means that the Buddha and living beings, one's own mind and the Pure Land, are fundamentally the same, although manifested differently. So the proper full use of the human mind, the proper, full, trued, straight, right on, that use of the mind is Buddha's mind. And the Buddha's mind is just that mind. And it's not two different minds. It's two different functions, two different uses. That's why it says, just like pure jade, you rub and you polish, and you bring it to perfection. In the same way you rub and polish your own humanity. When humanity reaches a polished, perfect point, that is Buddhahood accomplishing itself. So Huineng is very explicit on this. Let me read you a little more because he's really so clear in expressing this mind ground teaching. He says, if your essential nature, and I use the word trued rather than true, because true to me is dynamic. I mentioned it earlier, it's like the tire of a bicycle. You true the tire, you get the spokes all lined up and it moves smoothly. If it's not working correctly, I suppose you could do the same for car tires too. If it's out of alignment, if your front end's out of alignment or something, you know. Actually, that's a definition for dukkha from Sanskrit. It means a tire that's out of alignment. So when it goes around, suffering. And then sukha, which is it's the opposite, is alignment. It's something that's going very smoothly. So again, I love these metaphors. So here, Master Huineng says, if your essential nature is balanced and centered, the living being is a Buddha. When your essential nature deviates and goes off course, the Buddha is a living being. You see how he's Buddha, living being, centered, off-centered? One thing, different uses. If your mind is devious and crooked, the Buddha is concealed within the living being. But with one thought balanced and trued, the living being becomes Buddha. Our own mind itself holds a Buddha, and this inherent Buddha is the real Buddha. If your own mind did not have its own inherent Buddha, where could the real Buddha be sought? This is right from Huineng in the Platform Sutra. So instead of saying this other shore of this line is some permanent fixed abode awaiting for your future arrival after death, which is how some people think of it. Well, I'm just going to put up with Berkeley and the monastery and all these people, my friends, and taxes. But when I die, I'm going off to the Pure Land. Ain't no lions and tigers, ain't no mumble sticks, just sweet watermelon and sweet buckwheat cakes, right? We'll be happy, happy as can be, come away with me to the Pure Land. No, it's not like that. It's not pie in the sky when you die. What's being presented here is something much more sophisticated and mature. Your own mind is the Pure Land. And if you have a crooked mind, a devious mind, even if you get to the Pure Land, you're going to stay. You'll be kicked out. Sorry. So Huineng sees it as a living spiritual project in the making. The Pure Land is what you make. As the mind is purified, he says, the Buddha land is purified. So this is this is very different. It's sort of like, it moves away from this idea that other power will save me, as opposed to other power will inspire me, will point the way, but I only have to save myself. I only have to do this myself. So that's why I wanted to say this shore and the other shore is a false dichotomy in the sense of this text saying the other shore, because what it's really talking about, there's a wonderful expression, it says, the sea of suffering is vast, but a turn of the head is the other shore. That turning of the head is your head, and it's changing of the heart. It's like, okay, yesterday I was really confused and upside down. I was not following the precepts, and I did a lot of bad things. I'm not going to do that anymore. That's the other shore. If you do it again, it's that shore. You change, it's the other shore. So most of the time we're toggling back and forth. That's what repentance and reform is about. Toggle good, toggle bad, toggle back, toggle forth, until you habituate the goodness. And it does habituate, and it starts to build and take over. This is called irreversibility. But I told you the story, but it's worth telling again, where somebody said to the master, if the Buddha's all power and omniscient and really so wise, why doesn't he just take us all to the Pure Land and be done with it, right? And the master said, well, maybe he could. Well then, but then master said, but in a single thought you'd come back. And it was like, oh, it wasn't just funny, it was like profound what he was saying. Even if a Buddha could take you to a Pure Land, because the Pure Land comes from a pure mind, the Pure Land would evaporate with your polluted thought. So there's no Pure Land outside of a pure mind. So it's again taking the other power and saying, why doesn't the Buddha save me? As opposed to, why don't I purify? What's interesting to this is you can think about this as an engaged form of Buddhism, because if you do that, then by extension, your relationships with others start to change and purify. And a little Pure Land can start to come out of right this here and now world. Really, it seems so inconceivably out there to talk about that, but if you really thought about it, if you actually change yourself, it will radiate naturally to change and affect others. If we wanted to, in fact, if we changed our minds and hearts about our consumption and use of resources and pulled back to need instead of greed, you could imagine the environment that we live in correcting itself. That the pollution and the global warming and all of this that we're talking about is actually made from the mind. Change that mind and this could come back. Not change that mind, you're not going to have a technological solution. Never. So this is a way of thinking about engaged Buddhism. Isn't about just getting involved in politics or something. It's about really fundamentally the deep form of engaged Buddhism is changing your heart and mind. So text goes on. This brilliance are beyond compare. This is the power of expedience. And it goes on with the clear understanding of the Buddha Dharma, constantly contemplates 3 periods of time, past, present, and future. Although he accords with states, does not discriminate. This, according with states, not discriminate, means you have this Vajra-like wisdom that says all phenomena, all things are like dreams, illusions, bubbles, and shadows, like dewdrops and flashes of lightning. Contemplate them thus. That's what it means not to discriminate. You're aware, but you don't discriminate. Accords with states does not discriminate. Those of you who want to really look into it, study the Shurangama Sutra. This is the power of expedience. It goes on. Delighting in the contemplation of living beings without the thought of living beings. This doesn't mean you don't think of living beings. It means you don't identify and attach to them as separate, distinct living beings. At the very level, it just means you're not aware of the good you're doing. You're doing it effortlessly, not expecting return or reward. But not having the thought of living beings is to understand that all living beings are basically living beings because of their greed, anger, and stupidity. Without the greed, anger, and stupidity, they're Buddhas. So not having a thought of living beings, you don't categorize it into some fixed dimension, but you actually see all people and all beings as immensely elastic and potentially rich in the expanse they can realize, and don't limit them to being just ordinary living beings. This also helps get rid of arrogance in the sense that you actually kind of have this feeling, just as my teacher gathered me in pretty dumb and awkward and worked with me compassionately, I should at the same time extend that compassion and kindness and equality to everyone else. So it gets rid of a false sense of superiority, but also gets rid of a false sense of inferiority. Both of those become obstructions. The Vajra Sutra, to give you a passage here on the discrimination of no thought, says, I must cause all living beings, those born from eggs, from wombs, from moisture, and by transformation, those with form and without form, those with thought and without thought, those not totally with thought and those not totally without thought. I should call all those living beings to enter nirvana without remainder. So this is the Vajra Sutra expressing this wide embrace of living beings and across that potential. Universally viewing all destinies without a thought of destinies, it's the same thing. Seeing that there are these different paths, but not fixing and reifying them into something constant and unchanging, but rather fluid. The whole thing about this teaching is the fluidity of the change, the transformative potential. All living beings can become Buddhas. All people can become sages, and this extends to the 10 Dharma realms. And the realms themselves are not fixed abodes, but these are constantly changing by the thoughts and karma of living beings. That's why the Earth Star Sutra says something like, the hells are not fixed abode, but they arise from the karma, the evil karma of living beings. As their evil karma changes and they come up with more creative, devious ways to mess things up, corresponding hells appear. Oh, like, I'll come up with something there's no hell for. No. You will invent that evil and you'll invent the corresponding hell. This is how cause and effect works. It's really quite inconceivable. If you want to see a great movie sort of about this, is what I like is Kurosawa's movie called Dreams. And basically, it has a very strong Buddhist theme, but one of the central elements in it is that those who have power and scientific skill create nuclear weapons. And those nuclear weapons basically ruin the world. And he watches this. It's Mount Fuji blows up in the movie, and then the next little vignette, you see people wandering around screaming and yelling, and all of a sudden you realize it's a hell. But it's a hell that's created by the misuse of nuclear energy. And so it's not an existing hell that you'd see in Buddhist sutras, but it's a corresponding hell that arises from the misuse of that energy. And the beings in there are those that invented those weapons and used them. And now they're in this. So he takes a very modern approach and says, so then you kind of think, what would corresponding hells be for any action that I could commit? And there would be then because it follows, everything is made from the mind. So that elasticity of not seeing the destinies is fixed. Also, this is very important, this gets away from predestined. See, the destinies is, the word here is chu. It means interest or inclination, leaning towards, where towards. It doesn't mean necessarily a fixed, and certainly doesn't mean that anything's predestined or fated. So someone was asking me about astrology. I don't know much about astrology. Heng Sure knows much more than I do. But even if you accept some notions of astrology, it's only pointing to the leanings that you might have, the inclinations you might have. But it's not your destiny, and it's not predestined. Because if you had that notion, then everything is not made from the mind, it's made from the stars alone. Okay, well, fine. I don't see that in the text, right? What it's saying is your karma creates certain situations that make it seem as if you're destined. But these are just inertias, these are tendencies that you built up through your mind and body and thoughts and habituations. So it's wonderfully freeing in the sense that it gives you the sense that anything can change and be different. Sometimes they're really strong. Sometimes the tendencies and inclinations are strong, but that doesn't mean they can't be changed. So this idea that everything can and should change is at the heart of these teachings. So true destiny here just means an inclination. In fact, you could look at it this way. As I am now is the result of my inclinations and leanings that I did not correct from the past or I favored. And as I will be in the future are the leanings and inclinations I'm having now. So you move it to a dynamic rather than it's destined to happen, is that you're destining, you're leaning, you're inclining. So it's like self-cultivation then would involve this process of where am I leaning right now? Where are my inclinations? It's really interesting to get what is it I'm inclined towards? And in doing that self-reflective thing, you can see where you will actually reify and end up as. And changing that changes where you go. It's very, very powerful stuff. That's why my teacher in this 10 Dharma realm says, the 10 Dharma realms, the hells and animals all the way up, are not beyond a single thought of this present mind. This present mind is the creator of all destinies. So then you come back and say, aha, I am the creator of my destiny. I am not the victim of it, nor am I how should I say it, the passive follower of that, but I'm actually creating it step by step, thought by thought, and so forth. I just want to end tonight with I could go on, but I want to make sure I got through these 5. So I got through the 5, right? But I also wanted to share a little bit with you. I said the reason for starting the Friday night Avatamsaka is one, because this was the entry point of me when I came to the monastery, was the Avatamsaka Sutra was being lectured. It's where I had deep affinities. And then when Heng Sure and I did the bowing pilgrimage, this is the one text we took with us and studied and used. Yeah, have a seat. I'm going to ramble on a bit here, so get comfortable. And so we took this one text with us, and the reason I'm starting with chapter 9 is that's where we started chapter 9 on the bowing pilgrimage. And so all of our writings by our instructions from our teacher was to connect passages from the Avatamsaka Sutra to what was happening to us on the highway, and to use the sutra to illuminate the specifics of our highway, and to use the specific events, the concrete things happening in the highway, back to the principles of the sutra. And he said, when you get in this dialogue, the sutra will become very alive and meaningful for you, and your path and your walking and your destination will become much more clear. And so that was the case. And so in doing this, I partly want to go over this, and I realized I probably went a little fast, but I want to go over some of the principles here, like the lotus and the vajra, and what these terms mean. But I also want to start bringing out some of the events of the pilgrimage that happened and share those with you as well. So every Friday night, I'm going to try from now on to do that, bring these stories, illustrate. And so today, I discovered this. And this is a journal that I had completely forgotten about from the pilgrimage. And it's got all kinds of stories in it. So tonight, I'm going to share one story. I'm calling this the Orange Journal. I'm not colorblind, it's orange, right? Okay, and this was the ones the master gave us. He says, get these, right from the hip. Carry it in your monk's bag. When you have an insight or thought, pull it out and write it down. He says, because your habituations are so strong, even if you have a brilliant awakening insight, in 3 minutes it'll be gone. So if you write it down, you might be able to remember. On the other hand, if it's not true and it's false, if you write it down, you'll be able to see through it later when you're reading, go, ooh, cross it out. So this one I wanted to share with you tonight has to do with this idea of this whole chapter is about the Buddha releasing light. And with the light he releases, it causes people light to augment and see things they don't see ordinarily. And so in other words, he shares his light. He shares his light and lights up the space. It lights it up so people can see things more clearly. They have to have an initial light of their own and able to see it. Otherwise, it's blinding. It's like Plato's cave, where if you've been in the cave so long, when you actually see light, it blinds you and you can't see anything. So there has to be a little light that you're accustomed to, and then this extraordinary light that the Buddha sheds allows this, as I explained, that lightning thing to really light up. So the releasing of light here can be very extraordinary, as we see in this text. I mean, you can see the destinies, you can see all paths of existence, you see manjushris and all these assemblies and whatnot, but it can also be something very ordinary and not extraordinary. Very ordinary, simple acts of kindness, a sympathetic joy of giving, radiate. They create a light. And so in a sense, we can all illuminate, we can all radiate. And this was the event I want to relate tonight. So this is, I just found this today. This is Christmas Eve. Let's see if the, yeah, it's Christmas Eve. And we're on the coast, Highway 1. And because we're Buddhist monks doing a pilgrimage, we're not opening presents. It's just, we don't do Christmas, right? We just finished bowing. After we finish bowing, we'd light a kerosene lamp on our little, inside the car. And Heng Sure reads the Avatamsaka in Chinese, and then we work together to translate it, and we write it down. So we have a huge compendium of our translation as every night we do this. So we had just finished bowing. The sun had pretty much set, although there was just that little glow left, and had lit the kerosene lamp, and of course it was really quiet. It was Christmas Eve. There's nobody out, especially on Highway 1 on these remote areas. And I'm getting ready. I step outside for something, I'm not sure, and I look, and coming down the road, I'm going to read you from this, is a father and daughter walking, father's holding her hand. And they're all alone. And you can tell they're really not dressed for the weather, it's cold. And they come up, and the father basically says, we're out of gas. We ran out of gas. And it's a desolate stretch of coast. There's no gas stations, it's a holiday. The girl has a little tear in her eye. She's all dressed up. She has this lovely ribbon in her hair. You know, I think of, you've seen Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's shoes, you know, those red sparkly shoes. And she's obviously in the Christmas, and now their car out of gas, there they are on the highway. And clearly it shattered her hopes to be with family for Christmas. It's almost totally dark. There's no sign of life for miles, and we know that because we spent, you know, those nights there. And then I remember Wesley Wu, who was Helen Wu's husband, who was a doctor, looked after our bodies on the trip, but also looked after the car. He was a great mechanic. From his point of view, I don't know if there was much difference between a human body and a car, but anyhow, when we started, the car would never really run. And Master said, it doesn't have to run. If you're only bowing less than a mile a day, just push it ahead. You know, don't worry. But Wesley got it working so you could put some gas in and it would start up. And it was one of those vintage cars it was a 56 Plymouth. So if you remember the 56 Plymouth, you don't shift this way or this way, you push buttons. Yeah, it was a push button transmission. Some of you are going, what? No, some people know what I'm talking about. Those cars had push button transmissions. But if you pushed a button, it was not sure it would go forward. Sometimes it'd go backwards. Sometimes it'd shut off. Anyhow, he had given us an extra little tank of gas. And so I remembered that, and I thought, well, and I said, here, you can take our gas. You can use that. And the little girl lights up like a Christmas tree. She wipes away her tears. She gets this big smile on the face. And I wrote down what she said. She says, let's see. Oh, I knew they would. I just knew they would. Dancing up and down with joy. Now we can make it home for Christmas, can't we, Daddy? Meaning, I knew they would. I knew these guys would have something. And she was so happy. And then she looked in the window of the car, and that's why I brought this down. Where'd it go? Oh, yeah. Could you bring that over? She looked in the window of the car, and the oil lamp was lit, and this was on our altar. So this, what is that? I'll pass it around, you can see it. But this is a picture of the Guanyin Bodhisattva that's at the City of 10,000 Buddhas before it was gilded. So we had this, it was kind of appropriate for the pilgrimage because we weren't gilded either. We were rough hewn. But this is a picture when it was at Gold Mountain. Now, why is it all faded? Well, the sun on the coast highway for the whole trip. This started out as brilliant, and now it's faded. But anyhow, so this is sitting there, the lamp's next to it, and the little girl's looking in. And she says, "You're a real lifesaver." And I thought, yeah, no. She's pointing to this. She says, "I have no idea what it means." And she said, "But you have no idea what this means to us. Bless you." And then she takes the gas, they go off, we see them drive by, and she's in the window waving as she goes by after her Christmas holiday. So at that time, we were reading ahead. We were actually onto the 2 chapters ahead called the Worthy Leader chapter, and this was the verse I put to match that experience. Another light is released called delightful. This light can awaken living beings, making them happy with Buddha, Dharma, and happy with the Sangha as well. So this is from the Worthy Leader chapter, and I matched it with this story that I remembered today. So every Friday I'll try to bring another story and share with you. But the thing I was trying to bring out more deeply with this is Master Hua saying, do not think that this sutra doesn't have anything to do with you or your lives. If you understand the sutra, you can see in your lives these moments where something you do can release a little light and make the world a better place. Conversely, the opposite. But they are talking about what it means to be human and to perfect our humanity and to study our humanity. And it's not just about Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So next Friday, we'll do another one. Oh, I can pass it around if anybody wants to take a look.
Great. Okay, it's not easy to share this story after the Marty story, but I try my best. About speaking a little bit about upaya, expedient means. In my story, I title Expedient Dharma, Shoes Dharma. I mentioned to everyone last Friday, I have a very powerful experience when I was bowing in the mosque in Ahmedabad, India. And the story begins before we enter to the mosque. So we have the group of people, international group. Peter from Austria, we have from Europe, I think from America, I'm from Poland and from here, and Jin Chuanshi was there, Gary Zukov, and was the leader of the group was Jayesh Bhai, who showing us the old city Ahmedabad. So we have to walk on the steps, the kind of stone steps. It was a kind of stone platform. And it was a beautiful doors, and around was a lot of shoes. Not really well arranged, kind of little bit, but a little bit messy. And what Jayesh Bhai, who went with us, started doing, he started putting all them together, kind of lining up, very gently rearrange the space. And as he started doing this, shoes, polishing and kind of making shoes purulent, I can say, Marty says, everyone started joining him. Pay attention. Of course, we pay attention how we put our shoes. It was not that nicely put it. And he looked at us with Jayesh Bhai with a smile. Is it looking beautiful? I says, yeah. And, it's a gentle way to kind of honor this space. And he was not a Muslim. He was the man who want to show us a mosque as a kind of an experience of India is very diverse. So it's very powerful. So I remember kind of watching all these people who was with us. Anytime we enter to another places, how carefully, included myself, we put our shoes before we enter. And they also arrange shoes of other people. Very gentle, simple act, but had an impact. of people's hearts. It's coming from the heart. To continue with Shu's Dharma, it was my 108 days training to become a full Your Day monk. Actually, recently, 2 weeks ago, the new group are started in, I think, the city of the Dharma realm. They're the nuns who are cultivate vigorously, and we have one novice. You see, he's not Mr. Chin Liangshi. He's also preparing himself for the full ordination. And how is the setup is a lot of ceremonies, practices, classes, this kind of a learning of craft of monk or nunhood. And because it's so tense, we don't have that much time. So sometimes we're rushing things. And I used to rush myself when I go always to the restroom. Take out the shoes, go to the restroom, do my business and back and go to another activity. And I remember we were sitting in one of the classes, and the monk who was responsible for our training, he began with the kind of a sentence. He says, it's very, very important. You have to pay attention how you enter to every moment of your daily activities. Anytime is opportunity to cultivate. Whatever you do, the ceremonies, you do eating food, or you enter your restroom, pay attention to your awareness. And he looked with a smile on me. For instance, if your shoes are messed, he says, this is like you make a picture where your consciousness was before you entered the space. And it's really kind of, boom, like touch my heart. I never really pay attention to it. And I look at sometimes, these are very crooked. So I didn't pay attention. When I come to Buddha hall, to restroom, or any places. Can I have a second to stop and put shoes together and enter with the kind of more awareness? So I give it a kind of two examples for me. The one is like Jayesh Bhai was a kind of a gentle example how we can skillfully teach others with the presence and deep kind of very gentle care. And another one was the kind of skillful means how to poke someone with very gentle way. But definitely I was feeling that he's speaking to me and to my habit. And to this day, anytime I come to the Buddha hall, I always put shoes together and kind of reflect. A second reflection, where is my mind when I enter to this hall? And the shoes and any activities, even how we put the chopsticks before we eat, how we serve is kind of a reminder. Do I care? And maybe not. Maybe my mind is somewhere, is distracted, and so forth. So this is a story, a skillful means of putting shoes together in the skillful way, as a reminder of our awareness and also an offering for others, potentially. So for this note, I want to also make a few announcements. So, first of all, tomorrow in the morning will be the last hour morning ceremony online streaming. We take a break and we will start again April 23rd. So you can find recordings on the YouTube channel, morning ceremony, I think evening ceremony will be as well. That we encourage you to kind of maintain these practices, and we'll back soon after a week. And also, we have upcoming retreat. Still, I don't know, can there any empty places do people want to join? It's a Sudana retreat in Dharma and Buddhist University Extension team put together the retreat. It's from mindfulness to heartfulness, led by Doug Powers. Marty will be one of the guests, and Dharma Master Heng Sure, and is from June 3rd to June 10th. Very rare opportunity to cultivate together in silence. And we also have in July 22nd to 29 or 23rd? 22nd to 29th, Buddha Root Farm in Oregon. What is the website for that? buddharootfarm.org. You can look at on the schedule, on the theme, and so forth. Beautiful opportunity to cultivate together in the forest. And we recite the Guanyin name, by the way, speaking about the Guanyin presence. And I think this is it for today. And see you next Friday. And tomorrow night, Reverend Heng Sure will as well lecture Avatamsaka Sutra from Queensland. Will be streaming. We actually put the big screen here. It's not like big crowd like today, but some few people sometimes show up. But we are watching, and if you want to join and be with the group of Dharma friends and watch together the Dharma class and learn together, is definitely an opportunity. So. And Sunday lecture, yeah, thank you, Locke. Sunday, Reverend Sure also will lecture. This is from the City of 10,000 Buddhas Live YouTube channel, 7:30 the same time and to 9 p.m. You can find information on our website, berkeleymonastery.org. You can go through Zoom or YouTube and don't miss opportunity. Okay, so we can transfer merit. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. 3 bows. Bowing respect to the triple jewels.